Um, Thank you everybody for coming. I'm excited to get started. It's 8 p.m. here, so I don't know if everybody else is as sleepy as I am, but I am Brittany Oletti. I'm from the United States Military Academy. Hopefully you just got to listen to one of my colleagues, Tom Mussman, just talk about a little bit about how we do the modeling process here. And I'm going to talk to you today about how we use real life modeling to teach our Keystone Differential Equations course here at USMA. So a quick agenda, I'm going to go over kind of the current landscape. Most of you guys are probably familiar with, but we'll start with there. I'll do a little bit of the framework on how we have our modeling set up in our course, the application details, some of the advantages and challenges that we have here, and the motivation behind all this. So I'm going to save the best piece for last. So current landscape, as you know, average college freshman will be placed into some sort of math appropriate class. Usually it's pre-calc, calc 1, 2, or 3, and how those are each divvied up at each university is pretty similar. And it would be based off the background that each of the students have as they get into college. And when it comes to modeling, they might not take any sort of modeling class in their undergraduate career. So even math majors might not get a ton of modeling exposure. It might be in one of their machine learning classes. They might get exposure to a modeling class, depends on the university. STEM majors might not, they might get some modeling and scientific method, but nothing dedicated towards modeling, and non-STEM majors might not even see it. But I put up this quote from the MMA that says, while less common, a first-year course in math modeling that incorporates just-in-time techniques from calculus, discrete math, and/or statistics could serve as a pathway to recruit new majors or provide existing first-year math majors with a richer sense of purpose in their undergraduate studies. And I really like the last part of that quote because I think it does give people who traditionally might not see the utility of math this like richer sense of purpose, right? So let's talk about our demographics before we move forward. The demographics of the students that we have here at West Point, we call them cadets. I'll try and make sure I call them students, but it might slip up a little bit. So we have college freshmen who are in their first semester here is when they take this class. And they have both calculus in their background, so at least Calc 1 and some sort of aptitude for math. And they've already taken that AP or IB calculus. Some of them have done as much as vector calculus before they came here, and are just going through our course because they don't quite remember, or they're excited to do differential equations because they haven't done it yet. And then the average SAT math score for these students is about 765, and their average AP exam, if they took it and if they released it to us, was about a 4.2. And so the total enrollment out of about 1,200 students that we take on into our program that's called the Advanced Math Program is about 325 students. So that's kind of the important demographics I wanted to share with you before I talk to you about the approach that we have, because these students tend to be very, very bright in math, and that allows them to succeed in this type of course. So our approach is a three-pronged approach. We have these in-class board problems, and you can see the picture. It's on the bottom left here is we have, I think it should show, oh, I'm sorry. On the bottom left is you see that we have whiteboards across the classroom, around the classroom, and we have 19 chalkboards and 19 students at any given time. So the students get to practice during lectures the mechanics of the differential equations. So this is like the mechanical piece before we really jump into that modeling piece. We want to make sure that they know how to solve traditional models or traditional DEs before we go into the actual models that we're going to use. The second thing that we do are the progressive MADs. MAD stands for Modeling Application Day. We have 2 of those in the semester, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that in a little bit. And this allows us to bridge the gap between those in-class mechanics and creating some sort of really good developed model. And then once we feel that they have this really great modeling process, we do this end of term project where they get to select their own project and build out these models that they get to work with. And we'll talk more about the project as well in a minute. So all 3 of these lines of effort are kind of being conducted simultaneously, but the end of term project doesn't get introduced until we finish MAD 2. So we'll talk a little bit about framework. For the framework is that in our first block, we are consistently doing in-class board problems in conjunction with our lectures. We are introducing the fundamentals of modeling and ODEs, and we do the first MAD is assigned, and it'll be completed a little bit into the second block. The second block looks a little bit similar, and as my colleague earlier in his talk mentioned, that this year we did intro to systems for our second block instead of doing higher order. And we think that that went really well this year. So I'll be happy to talk more about that later. And then finally, for block 3, well, not finally, in block 3, we refined this modeling process a little bit more. They already did their second MAD in block 2, and this is where we introduce that project that they get to do. And then finally, the last block, if you would, is mostly them working on those final projects in their final exam. There's a exam at the end of each block 1, 2, and 3. So a total of 4 major graded assignments for exams in the course. So maybe you saw this a few minutes ago, but if you haven't, this is our framework that we use to teach modeling here at West Point. So this is our use of math modeling triangle. So we start in kind of this real world application, this real world problem, and then we move from this real world to the math model by transforming kind of the stuff that is given to us. So very much the word problem piece of it. This part tends to be the part that our students aren't particularly comfortable with. They may have known how to do this from easier math problems from when they were in algebra or even trig, but now once they get here, they're having a hard time identifying independent, dependent variables, listing some assumptions. So this can be a little bit tricky for some of our students. The second part, the solve, finding the most appropriate techniques. Sometimes that's a wash. Sometimes they're really good at it. They like the actual mechanics of solving, but sometimes finding the appropriate technique to solve the differential equation can kind of stumble them up. And then finally, we go back and we interpret after we have the mathematical solution, go back into the real world problem. In general, they do pretty well with this piece as well. So we get this iterative process that they get to work on through each of the blocks and get familiar with until they're ready for the project. So we're going to talk a little bit about the first way we wade into the modeling process with the modeling application day. This is our first modeling application day that we have for them to do. So this is done in block 1 after they've done first order differential equations. And this one is an Ebola modeling day. This is adapted from Semiode. And it's a really fun project where they get to fit the model. And we like to take some sorts of headlines or resources. That way we can create something that feels really applicable to the students. So this one was a couple of years ago when there was another Ebola outbreak. And it allowed the cadets to be engaged with real world headlines and seeing how math is playing out behind the curtain, if you would. And this allows us to bridge the gap from these rudimentary models into this real world modeling framework using differential equations. The way that we frame these modeling application days is that we put them in groups of 2 or 3 students. And as they go through this, it's almost like, I like to call it as a guided nature walk. So the first one that we give them, we take them on the nature walk. The modeling application day tells them, say, hey, this is what you should look at. And we tell them to look at it and write it down. And then here's an example of an exponential model. Does this work? Not quite. Let's talk about a logistic model. Do we like this a little bit more? So the very first time we bring them into this sort of like modeling application process, we do it in this like really nice, we're going to hold your hand through the process nature walk. That way later we can hold their hands less. And it allows them to start working with data and the actual system. We use Mathematica, so it allows them to get their hands wet with Mathematica as well, so they can continue moving through this modeling application thought as well as the differential equations. The second modeling application day we do here this year, since we moved to systems, this one's slightly different, is that we used a combat modeling day with the Lanchester equations. So we gave them an actual model. It was the operation of bulldog bite in the Kunar province of Afghanistan in 2010. And we told them some of the data, how long the battle lasted. And part of what they were doing is they were trying to fit the data to their model. So they said how long the battle lasted and how many red and blue forces had both, they'd lost by the end of the battle. And once they got the model working, so we told them the end strings, so they were doing this parameter adjustments as they were doing it. We then say, okay, now do more. And we based it off of 3 different thoughts. So groups 1 and 4 we said, hey, how do you account for, let's add some aviation elements into it. We don't give them a ton of information. We just say, how would you do this, right? Add it to your model. How might we do this? For groups 2 and 5, we said, what if we want to make this some sort of non-homogeneous system? Let's modify initial conditions and consider how, if we were to use some artillery, if you would, into the system. Or for the third thing, We said, if we can add one more component of the red forces, let's like add in reinforcements. These are all fun ways for them to explore an ODE model, and contextually, all of the people in our courses are going to be military officers once they are done and they've graduated. So this also gives them a really nice real world application for them to tether differential equations to things that they may be doing in the future. This year, since we switched systems and higher order, we didn't end up doing our final modeling application day, so we only do 2. But on the previous years, when we have done first order, higher order, and then systems, we had this modeling application day, which has this one has a Humvee and a suspension system and a really expensive piece of satellite equipment that we use for communications. And the goal of this was trying to use that spring mass equation to make sure that it's not too bouncy and we don't destroy our equipment. So this is another military focused modeling application day. And in terms of nature walk, we still walk them through it, but we're holding their hands less and pointing less in that simile, if you would, right? Instead, we're saying, hey, let's try this. Now, what do you think you should do? Or what kind of suspension should we do? What if you had this budget? To allow them to really explore the real world applications of those differential equations and modeling. Now for our large scale project, the students get to select their topic. They can either observe a phenomenon and attempt to model it. This would be kind of like those strong models that had been discussed previously, or they can take one of these canonical models that they get taught in class, such as SIR, the Lanchester equations, or predator-prey competition models, and they can adapt those to a different scenario. Some of the interesting topics that we had this year were India's urban infrastructure and environment, which was kind of a predator-prey model is what they try to do. The Uber versus Lyft competition revenue. There was an E. coli breakout in one of the pools here on where we live, and then modeling the August complex fire that happened in California, and then a topic on the Pacific garbage patch in the ocean. So I'm showing you 2 of the submissions that I got this year from my students. This first one is a more canonical Laca-Volterra model where they went and got data on the number of zebras and lions in that, I'm gonna mispronounce this, so I think it's Ngorongoro crater in Tanzania. So they had actual data for this, so they did some data fitting. And then they used that Laca-Volterra model to try and get the data to fit what they'd found online to be the accurate data. And then they used Mathematica to make sure it plotted correctly, and then talked about some of the limitations of their models. So they did a pretty good job going through and doing a really applied version of Laca-Volterra. But one of the things that I brought up to them is I would have liked to have seen them to bring in some other non-homogeneous pieces to their system. Now, submission number 2. These cadets were more on the other hand, where they said, we want to observe a phenomena and let's try and model it. So they're college freshmen and they're very interested, but they're not allowed to drink. So they talked about modeling blood alcohol content and when these blood alcohol content spikes might occur. And they're using a unit step to demonstrate if they continue to drink alcohol at certain iterations, how much can they drink before the night is over to maximize alcohol and minimize how high their blood alcohol content gets. And so they went through and made a really great system where they have the quantity of alcohol in milligrams in their stomach, and they move from stomach to gut, from gut to bloodstream. And then they plotted all of this with some of the data that they found online and some parameter fitting. And then they brought in their own math model. So they came back, brought it back to real world where they did this interpretation where they know they're going to have soldiers who'd like to drink. They say, hey, Bob's going to start drinking at 7. He plans to have several more drinks. How will Bob have to space apart these drinks to keep his blood alcohol under 0.31%? I loved that part. You know, these are 18 and 19-year-old kids, and I said, you should probably stop well before that, but they did really good here. They were doing their best. I think also in their alcohol, they assumed 100% alcohol proof. And I said that maybe that assumption also maybe needs to be updated. So this was a really fun one. They took some thought. They did a lot of analysis, a lot of using data, a lot of finding parameters and using some of the concepts that we did in class, such as the unit step and systems. And I think that they did a great job here. Now, I know that your question might be like, Well, those are two completely different projects, right? So how do you even go about grading so many different projects? Because if you have everybody doing similar projects, well, and then on a course as big as ours, we have actually 7 or 8 instructors teaching all the exact same course. So we have all these projects and we wanted to standardize grading. So one of my colleagues, Tom Mussman, who spoke earlier, developed this new project grading and scoping matrix that we use to help scope in and also help us advise the students on how to do their project. So we gave everybody a baseline. We said, hey, the baseline for data, complexity, and creativity would be, you have no data. That's a 0 in terms of points. Complexity would be like a first order. And then creativity would be like you took a model directly from the textbook or you took it directly from Semiote. The next level, if you would be that for data, you researched the endpoints or some sort of parameters. For complexity, it'd be like a second order or a 2x2 system. And then for creativity is that you add on 1 or 2 justified terms. So it's not just your canonical textbook. And then for kind of the third level here, as we said, for data, if you have time series data, that kind of brings you like a 2. If you have a third or higher order, a 3x3 system, that also brings you to a 2, or creativity is 3 or more justified terms. And so we put all of this together into one grading rubric that looks like this, that says we have a little hard enough metric. So if you have 1 point as you add up all of your points across the 3 things, and if you did it perfectly, you've earned a B. Now, doing it perfectly might be quite hard. So generally what we did is we try to get everybody around the 3-point part. And we would use this to be like, hey, you have no data and you have a first order, maybe you've added a term, and that tells me that you're kind of at maybe a B project. Maybe we should talk about ways to make this into a system. Or maybe there's some sort of parameters that we could start researching. And as you can see, there's these yellow boxes that say MAD 1 and a red box that says MAD 2. So that was the skills that they learned while they did MAD 1 and MAD 2. So in MAD 1, they got the time series data for the Ebola case, and it was a first order and it was a model from Semiote, but those are the 3 skills that they developed in MAD 1. In MAD 2, they had to do some parameters, researching, and fitting. They had a second order system, and then we required them to add 1 or 2 justified terms. So that allowed them to get after some experience of getting some sort of solid foundation. And as you can see, if you were to add up all the points under solid, which is worth 1 point for the MAD 2, then that is the 3 points that we kind of would have been looking for. So we already kind of coached them into the stuff that we would like to see, but we gave them the flexibility to kind of pick and choose where they could find their complexity, if you would. I'll talk a smidge about Scudem. We got to hear from one of, I think 3 of our groups already today. So the benefit is that by doing this, we call Scudem the cherry on top for our students. So it's not required. We give them some sort of bonus points to our course if they choose to participate. And we had a really good showing this year. We were really impressed with our cadets. I think the swap from higher order to systems really allowed them to engage with Scudem a lot more this year. So we had 15 teams participate and 6 of them got outstanding. Hopefully you got to listen to some of them talk a little bit earlier today, but this really allowed those cadets who are thoroughly enjoying modeling to like go the extra mile and get in this extra, like we say, the cherry, right, to this like nice sundae. So some of the challenges some of the challenges that we face are getting the right fit for each student. So this course isn't for everybody. Some cadets do have the calculus background, but they're not able to, they don't have the mathematical prowess, if you would, to keep up in the course, or vice versa. The cadet has, or student has the mathematical prowess, but since they don't have enough calculus, they're really struggling to keep up in course. So we want to make sure that we get the right fit for each student. One of the hard things too is making it all time well. We have homework assignments, we have technical labs to work on Mathematica, we have the MADs, the project midpoints. So we do some midpoints with them when drafts are due, and the exams. So trying to get it all to fit can be really tight. And finally, balancing the instructor load for the projects. So each of our new faculty have anywhere between 18 and 19 distinct projects that they're trying to coach through it. And that can be a lot of legwork for that instructor, especially new instructors. So you might be thinking, like, how do you fit all that into one semester, right? Well, first, we have some unique advantages, and I can't not bring those up, right? So we meet 4 to 5 times per week for a total of 64 sessions in the semester, and each of those class periods are 55 minutes. So we get a lot of face time with the students, and this will happen all year too. We have our follow-on course vector calculus, and we'll have them 4 or 5 times as well. We have 18-week long semesters, and we have these really small class sizes. Like I said, we have about 19 cadets, and we each take on about 3 sections each. So we each have about 50 to 60 students at any given time. The things that they will do after our course, for context, would be they will go from our class into vector calculus, or they can test out of it if appropriate. And then they will move into statistics. And that's kind of it in terms of the math department, unless they choose to be a math major, which would be great, right? But otherwise, this is the experience that they have here. And then they go on to do their major dependent courses. And I've saved the best part for last, when you're like, why do you do this? This is so crazy, right? Well, first and foremost, they will also get another ODE or PDE class should they be engineers or math majors. So I know that they're going to get exposures to the ODEs again, but really the framework of teaching modeling, the biggest piece is that we teach the cadets not what to think, but like how to think, right? Which is critical, because at the end of the day, all of our students will be Army officers as soon as they graduate from here, and they will need to be able to solve real world problems in real time. And teaching them how to model will give them this framework that they can take well beyond their time outside of their college education and well beyond their math experience. So I leave that with you. And are there any questions? Don't see any questions. I double checked the chat. I didn't see anything in the chat. Feel free to email me at brittany.oletti@westpoint.edu. I'd like to say thank you again to the organizers for organizing this awesome SIMU conference. We're really enjoying all the shows, or all the talks, and please let me know if you guys have any questions. And I hope you guys have a great night.
Hi, Brittany. Thank you.
Oh,
This
yes,
is
ma'am.
really good talk. And I'm just wondering, would you feel comfortable sharing your, I know you shared on the slides already, but I just wonder if you were feeling comfortable sharing your rubrics of grading the models. And I see you also have ODE classes afterwards. Do you use similar rubrics for grading the projects? I mean, that's something I'm always interested in collecting, because it's very challenging to grade projects.
Oh, for sure. I actually don't teach any of the follow-on question or the follow-on ODE courses. I teach this one in vector calculus. So I can't really speak for what they may or may not use in that course, but this is what I use, and it will also be available, the slide deck. I think Dr. Winkle asked us to provide them as speakers, so I'll make sure that gets put in my slides if you want to use it, but this is the gist of our grading rubric that we use for those projects.
Thank you. I'm taking a screenshot.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and just as a follow-up to that, sorry, Brittany, we tend not to rubric heavily into these projects because they're so diverse, and you really don't know how much work the student, like because we do interim reviews, like with the students, you can see how much work they put in. And so there's this whole, like, did you try a unique problem? Did you work really hard? Did your data set just not work out for you? And so it's like impossible to model because your data is really hard. And so kind of we take all that into consideration and really find that kind of making a hard rubric for kind of is very hard. Besides, like, did you spell your sentences right and make something correct? Like there's a lot of gut that goes on with the rubric, which is hard to explain, but like as me being not a, yes, sorry, that's all. Sorry, Brittany.
Thanks, Tom. Did that help? Is Yang Ping? I'm sorry if I said your name
Yes,
wrong.
that's very helpful. And I think Jeremy also has a question.
Oh yeah, hey Jeremy, what's up?
Hi, thank you for the talk. It was really cool to see how you actually implemented it, and it really got me thinking on how I can implement this into my class.
That's awesome.
I have a question about when you make the project proposal, because students get the proposal on projects. When do you make them do? Because the earlier you make them submit the project, the more they can do, but the less they can incorporate in the class from the class. So I wonder, when do you make them submit the project proposals?
Oh, totally. So it ends up being about 9 weeks into the course. So about halfway through, but we're about done with the second block. So during the third block, we give them the project proposal. The third block was higher order this year. So it was you know, in a continuation of first order. So it didn't feel like that new to them. Like when I pulled them and I said, hey, like, how does higher order feel to you? And they're like, this is super easy. But, you know, as like previous years, they'd go from first order to higher order, and then they would be in the systems block when they'd have to do that project proposal, and it would go south pretty quickly. So the benefit is that they'd seen first order in systems, and then they do the proposal. We kick it back with some feedback, and then they have 2 other IPRs before they submit their entire project, and they do their presentations. So we have 3 touch points before we put them in front of people with their final project.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.